So what I'm going to try to do now is, if this will let me do it, I'm going to show you how to do this actually in Quip that we're going to sort of do. So see if I can share my screen here again. So I'm going to go into Quip and show you kind of how to actually use the templates to do this. So you remember last week, this is sort of the inventory that I did here. So before we go into too far that one, I'm going to show you, there's a document here called the 7 Basic Plots. And so this is the document that we're going to use. Now what's helpful for you guys is essentially I've taken all of the 7 plots here and kind of taken all the stages and listed them just like this. So you've got Overcome the Monster, Rags to Riches, The Quest, The Voyage and Return, Comedy, Tragedy, Rebirth. So you've got all of them kind of right here so you can see them. And then down the sides, we've got kind of the steps that they have. So these are sort of basic versions of those steps that I showed you before. Now, again, what we're going to do here is we're going to make this sort of simple on ourselves. And I'm going to basically go through it and copy these columns. So I'm going to copy from here all the way down to here, just like this. I'm going to push Control-C, just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into this document. Okay, so I've copied those ones, and I'm in my Hasan document. Now, I'm going to basically take this content right here, and I'm going to edit and then paste special values. Now what I've done here is I've essentially put in the steps. So what I've got here now, if you can probably see it if you want to go in and actually just look at the documents in Quip, is that I've laid out the sort of 7 steps here. So we've got this Overcoming the Monster, Introduce My Hero, Anticipation stage. We've got the stage that hints, the Dream stage, the sort of brush with the monster, the Frustration stage, the Nightmare stage, and the Miraculous Escape. All right? And below this, I've got all of the content I've written. So I've got my background information. I've got my sort of content here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this content and essentially just apply it to what we've got. So I'm going to start out with this background information, and I'm going to use this one and copy it into the document. So if you can sort of see this when I introduce my hero in this case, I'm just going to paste it here. So when I start writing, I'm going to basically say Hasan Minhaj was born in 1982 in Northern California. He attended UC Davis. His first job was in IT. I can use this content I wrote here to introduce my hero. From there, I've got my anticipation stage. This is the hints at the monster. Where is this monster coming from? So now what I'm going to do, which is going to be interesting, is I'm going to take the content that I have from down below and port it in. So remember, he hints at the monster. And so we're going to basically start down here and sort of say a little bit about him is that, my dad gave me an ultimatum to go to law school. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to basically just paste it in my anticipation stage. This way, talk about this piece of it, and that's going to be hinting at this one. And then we've got this initial stage, this idea of what could be happening in that way. And so this is where sort of Hasan starts to do some stand-up. So we're going to maybe introduce the fact that in this thing, the UC Davis coffee shop where he first performed his stand-up, and we're going to use that there. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about him. We're going to sort of use this description of him in that way. So that's kind of what we're going to do. And then we're going to talk about the frustration stage. We're going to talk about the frustration stage here, where he finally confronts the monster. And this is sort of the place where his dad basically was pushing him to go into this one, and this idea about this quote where his dad was pushing him to go into law school. And then we're going to kind of go down here and basically sort of describe sort of this professor with a quote saying not everyone should go to law school. So again, I've got all this sort of stuff and I'm just organizing the content I have into it. And then we've got the nightmare stage. This is sort of the final steps and stage in this one, the final ordeal. So he decides he's going to launch this YouTube channel. And sort of what he says is we're going to describe the very first very bad YouTube episode that he did right here in this way. And we're going to basically say it looks like the monster's going to win, talk about how embarrassed he was on this first first one here, describe it, how embarrassed he was, and the fact that this other comedian had broken on YouTube, but it probably wasn't going to be him. So we're now kind of taking this content and just, again, posting it around right here in that way. And then we're also going to add this, we got this quote here about how his dad really wanted him to go to law school, and maybe we're going to have that. We're going to use this stat that I have here. He didn't want to be one of these 720,000 graduate degrees per year. And then finally we have this miraculous escape, the last part of it. So we go into this one and maybe we talk about Jon Stewart giving him an interview, why they hired him, what he did differently, and we talk about the kind of this story about how he spent his parents' money. Now, what I've just done here, again, very quickly, is I've sort of taken the content and organized it in a way that actually is going to be helpful for you to be able to tell the story. So as you write this one now, you start out and you just start filling in the blanks. So now that you've got it organized this way, you can just start here. You can say, you could do one thing you could simply do is, let's say if I want to write this first one, maybe I've written these as bullet points. I'm just going to paste them right here. And then this could be how you actually write your first paragraph. So you pull this one out, and maybe what you do is you put a period there, and you literally just create paragraphs this way. It's really simple. Again, I didn't write these in full sentences, but suddenly I just started combining the content that I have, and it becomes, very quickly a paragraph. Now again, you may decide not to write this way, or you may decide that it helps you, but that's one way to do it, is like very quickly I just took my notes that I have, and this created a 163 words mini paragraph. The other thing you could do is you could write it. You could say, Hasan, didn't want to go to law school, but he relented and took the LSATs, never intending to go, right? And then, sort of this quote in here that you have in here, you add that in here as well. And then, or you could do something totally different. You could also decide just to write up at the top and just sort of write it, from scratch in this way. So that's kind of how you do it, is you will use it in this way to kind of take the content and port it into this structure there. Again, it will help you take from something that's unstructured and put structure in it from what you've got in that regard. So questions on how this works? Does this sort of make sense a little bit? The idea behind it is that, remember, story is structure. And so by using the structure to create your first draft, it will just help you tell this in a way that's more interesting, because most of the first stories you'll write will just be boring, because we don't sort of write in these narrative arcs that we have, which is why it's really important to use these ones. So that's why I think it's really important to try this one, is it'll help you in that way. So sort of the big goal for this week is I want you guys to take a stab at writing your first 2 stories. There's nothing too complicated about it, but I want you to take the elements that we've discussed here today and see if you can identify, your story inventory, and then take what is sort of the element that you want to most use, whether it's one of those story plots or whatever it is, and plug your content into it, and then just try and write. Remember, the first stories will be mediocre, but the target for a story is somewhere between 500 and 1,000 words. A good target is about 750 words, and if you do it the right way, you'll find it'll help you, it'll give you something compelling to start with, and we'll go from there.